West African Kora, a gourd instrument played by Gaskell.
So I'll tell you how it's built. Usually most of the musicians that I saw, most of the builders that I saw, would start from the bottom and they'd work going up towards the top. So at the base here we've got a calabash, which is a gourd that grows like a pumpkin. And so it grows low to the ground, so you pick it off the stem, and then you would take a giant handsaw and you would cut the calabash in half. And you would take a big spoon and scoop out all the wet stuff that's in there, all the seeds, and it gets dried in the sun for a little while. And then you would stretch a wet animal skin over the open half, which gets nailed to the backside here with upholstery tacks. And it's very important to put the skin on while it's still wet, because if it's even slightly dry, it's probably going to crack. You just have to tear it off and start over. So to get the skin on, what you would do is you would soak it in a bucket of water overnight, like the night before you want to start building the kora. You would take it out the next day, and then wring it out of all the water as best as you possibly could, and you would lay it flat on the ground. And you'd take the calabash here, the rim of the half calabash, and you lay it right up and over the top of the animal skin so your round end is facing straight up. You'd fold the flaps of the animal skin up and over the round side, because initially you're working with a lot more animal skin than what you see right here. So there's enough to cover the round side of the calabash initially. And so once it's covering, you'd go to a knife and you cut holes into the animal skin about where these upholstery tacks go here, which are holding the skin. And the holes that you're making with this knife are not for the upholstery tacks that you see here. These holes are for rope, because you've got to take a big 70, 80, 90 foot long piece of rope and string it through all those holes back here that you just made to tighten the animal skin on the front side. It's nice and tight like a drum. It's never played as a percussive instrument like so, but you still want this thing nice and tight, because when the weather changes, or when the seasons change even, the skin's gonna want to adjust to whatever the weather is doing. So if there's a lot of moisture in the air, it's gonna hold that moisture there and it's gonna loosen. When that happens, the bridge here, which hold all 22 of your plucking strings, move along with it, taking all the plucking strings, which means that there's moisture, it loosens, the strings are gonna get looser, and the pitch is gonna lower on all those strings. And then vice versa, the skin dries out on a nice sunny day, kind of kicking the bridge more out that way, which tighten all these plucking strings to raise the pitch. So the tighter you can get this on to begin with means the less that everything else is gonna move, meaning theoretically, you're gonna be tuning the instrument a little bit less, even though there's already a lot of work with that to begin with. So you've got your holes cut, and you're going to your rope. You take one end of your rope, and you just tie it off to one of the holes that you made, and then you start stringing it through all the others, while at the very same time, you've got your foot on the calabash here, and you're yanking the heck out of that rope each time you pull it through a hole to make it as tight as you possibly can. Eventually, you're gonna have what appears to be a giant star-shaped pattern of rope covering the remainder of the calabash. All right. That's the point where you go in with each of your upholstery tacks, nailing them in one at a time, going around in a circle. Got a few more for decoration here. And once those are in, you go back to that knife and you cut just behind the upholstery tacks that you just put in. And that takes off all of the rope, all the leftover animal hides, to re-expose the calabash to exactly what you see right here. All right. So at that point, you have 3 holes that you have to cut into the actual calabash. And 2 of those are for the neck, the long piece of wood. There's a hole up the top and another right down here at the bottom. So that's 2 of your 3 holes. The third is the largest, and so that one's there for two very important reasons. The first is so that sound can come out, and the second is so that money can go in. And there's a very specific reason as to why money goes into this hole, and it's because nowadays, I should back up and say, there are many songs named after people who had some form of role in the expansion of the Mandinka people's empire, where a lot of this music originated. A lot of these people lived a long time ago, 300 or 400 years ago, 500 or 600 years ago, even in some cases. So the rule is nowadays, at a performance, if you were to go to a performance in Gambia or Senegal, and a song was played about someone who lived this long ago, and there's someone in the audience who has a distant familial tie to this person, as the song's being played for their relative, it's then their responsibility to come up out of the audience and pay the musicians for calling out their family pasts. I'll get into why that happens later, because it's really such a huge part as to why all this music exists, and it's not a practice that I'm going to put into action today, so no worries on your part. And so, all right, so we've got all your holes through. Before you actually slide the neck through to secure it in place, you're going to go ahead and put your tuning rings on. All right. So there's one tuning ring per string. So if you're counting, you can probably see there's 22 of these. And so these are also animal hide, just like this. And they get wrapped around the neck while they're wet and then cross braided. All right. And so once they tighten, you can slide the neck through. And then at the bottom of the neck, you have to put an iron ring through. So to get that through, you take a power drill and then put a hole through the bottom of the neck, slide the ring through. And to secure it in place, usually just use some nylon cord. And then you wrap your anchor strings through that ring. So one anchor string per plucking string. So they're mostly blue on this particular Kora. And then you go to your plucking strings. You first tie them off to the anchor strings. And then each of your plucking strings come up here, getting wrapped around each of these tuning rings called konso in Mandinka. So you wrap each of these around about 4 or 5 times, each string per konso, and then tie it off with a square knot at the end. And then you go ahead and put the bridge on before you really start cranking them up. And the bridge, which is called the bato in Mandinka, this piece is held there by the tension of the strings. So it's just like the bridge of a violin in that way. So it would just come off if the tension wasn't what it needs to be. And also you've got 2 handlebars and a crossbar. So you've got to cut holes into the animal skin for those. So you first put the crossbar in, and then each of your handlebars go just in front of that crossbar. This traditional Kora here, I brought this home from my last trip to Gambia, which was in 2018. And this particular model is considered the traditional Kora, and it's been built exactly as you see it since around 1920. So right around then, they made a pretty serious modification from the initial build of Kora back in the 1720s. So I mentioned we've got the calabash. The animal skin comes from a cow, and I've never seen anything more than that used, both for the one over the calabash and then for your tuning rings. All of your wood, it comes from a tree called kano. And then lastly, your plucking strings are monofilament fishing line. So anywhere between 30-pound and 200-pound test grade fishing line. Some Koras use harp strings nowadays, and then also a lot of Kora builders today use a modified tuning system. So rather than using the konso, your cowhide tuning rings here, they'll use guitar style tuning pegs, which you just twist like you would a guitar. And if you're going to do that, if you wanted to build a Kora with the pegs, you'd want to have one that's got a neck that is not a circular shape like we've got here. You'd want to have one that was a rectangle so that you can fasten your guitar tuners to both the left and the right side of the neck in order to maintain the parallel nature of the strings. So that's absolutely critical that you do that. And it's kind of hard to see all this that I'm talking about. It's all very precise. And at the end of the program, if you want to have a close look at the Kora, you're more than welcome to come up.
I'm going to show you how to switch tunings for this next one. So the Kora uses 4 named tunings, and all 4 tunings are in a 7-note diatonic scale progression. So because of that, you can play really easily with a lot of other instruments that you've probably seen before. So the Mandinka names of these 4 tunings are Silaba, Sauta, Hardino, and Tomara. And I typically play in the first 2, in Silaba and Sauta. I've been in Silaba at this point. Most of the traditional songs in Silaba were composed right along the Atlantic coastline, in places like Gambia and Senegal. The tuning that I'm going to, called Sauta, so most of these songs were composed further inland, off the Atlantic coast, in places like Mali, for instance. So to do that, I'm going to go to the 4th of my 7 scale degrees. So here's the 7. And then your 8th, your octave. So to go to the 4th, and there's 2 of the 4th degree on the instrument. And I'm going to take them up a little bit. And this one that I'm bringing down here, this bass note, this is the 22nd string, and it's considered extra because the Kora up until the early 1970s only had 21 strings, and then when they started adding the 22nd, the elders at the time really frowned on it. Like, they didn't like it. They felt like it was taking away from the flavor of the traditional music, and over time it's become a lot more commonplace, and I feel like over 60% of the choras that I see now in West Africa have that 22nd string, or even a 23rd or 24th. Anytime you got more than 21 strings, you're always adding an extra bass note, a really low-pitched note, that you can tune to any of the other strings on the instrument as you wish. This one comes from Senegal. I learned it during my trip there in 2023. It's a song called Jati, and this one speaks of the importance of just overall hospitality and what it means to, I should say, the importance of taking care of each other and looking after one another. Jati. I learned how to play over the course of 4 visits to Gambia and Senegal. Most recent trip in 2023 being to Senegal. So most of the songs I'll share with you are ones that I learned from the teachers that I studied with while I was in my hometown of Olympia, Washington, about an hour and a half south of Seattle. Seattle. And that particular night, I heard another student of the instrument, like myself. His name was Kane Mathis, and he had been to West Africa quite a few times at that point. I didn't know it at that time, but I was absolutely captivated by the sound of this instrument. I remember the venue that night had very tall ceilings, and I was leaning back on a wooden bench, closing my eyes and just wondering to myself how all of this sound could be coming from just one instrument. And I decided that day to transition from being a lifelong clarinet player over to the Kora. So, not the most common jump from one to another. But I talked with Kane a couple weeks later, and I figured out he was willing to teach. So I found a Kora and started going up to Seattle where he lives to take lessons. And then a couple years later, I took my first trip to Gambia, and that particular trip was on contract with the college that I was going to at the time to receive my degree. So I got a study contract to go to Gambia and spend an entire quarter earning credit towards my music degree. And Kane, my US-based teacher, put me in touch with the teachers he studied with in Gambia. So that's where I ended up going in 2008, 2012, and 18. And so the teachers that I worked with there were, their names are Moriba Kuyate, and he's the son of my second teacher, the late Malamini Jabate. And Malamini passed away in 2013, so I had him for my first two trips. And then in Senegal, a couple of years ago, I worked with Youssoufa Sissoko and his son Mamadou. And between the four of them, I would receive usually between 4 and 8 hours of individual instruction per day. So I could have a lesson in the morning, afternoon, and the evening. Lots of practice time in between, and on top of that, I was able to stay with the extended families of my teacher. And in all honesty, I feel like I was taken care of as if I was one of the family. And it was one of the most remarkable things I've ever experienced. And so the fact they were willing to take in a student such as myself from across the Atlantic Ocean, show me the traditional music, teach me some of the Mandinka language or Wolof in Senegal, is truly a gift. And so when I'm presenting these programs, it is of utmost respect to their teachings and their The Mandinka language is primarily spoken by the Mandinka people. They are one of 6 indigenous groups living in Gambia. Each group has their own language, and most people that I knew how to speak 3 or 4 languages. So that's 2 of the other native languages, in addition to the language of the colonizer, which in the case of Gambia was English, and in Senegal, where I was in 2023, was French. My primary teacher in Gambia, his name is Moriba Kuyate, and he told me that this is a song of one being in a state of travel away from home. And when you are away from home, you deserve to be looked after and taken care of. In Senegal last year, my primary teacher, Youssoufa Sissoko, said that this is a folk story between a person and a snake, and that when physical contact is made between the two, supposedly good things happen for both. And so a lot of the wording in this song is talking about the powerful great python. Miniamba is the name of the song.
so I'd like your help with the response.
Okay.
It's the same 3 words in Mandinka each and every time. When they're translated, they mean the enemy was not successful at piercing Tira Makan with the sword. So, for starters, could you please say after me each of the 3 words one at a time? The first word is Susa.
Susa.
Second word, Rejo.
Rejo.
And the third word is the name of the person. Tira Makan.
Tira Makan.
Tira Makan.
Kira Makan.
Good. So now say Susa, Rejo, Tira Makan.
Susa Rejo Tira Makan.
Pretty good. All right. So now I'm going to sing those 3 words to you. I'd like you to go ahead and sing them back to me, and we'll just pass it back and forth to each other. So, okay. Susa Rejo Tira Makan.
Susa Rejo Tira Makan.
Susa Rejo Tira
Il a già mangiato, ama lui se la già mangiato.